All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is a collaboration between Tugboat and Testery, and we will be presenting 5 best practices for web dev agencies. Both of our companies tend to work with clients on client work, and through this process, we've come up with some good best practices that we've seen our customers and clients use, and that also we've practiced ourselves. And so we thought that we would share them with you all so that you might uh, be able to benefit from some of the things that we've learned. As far as some housekeeping, feel free to ask questions through the chat function on Zoom, and we'll have a Q&A period towards the end of the presentation where we'll go ahead and answer those questions. So I'm Chris Harbert. I'm the founder and CEO of Testery. Testery is a cloud-based continuous testing platform, which enables companies to run open source tests quickly and at scale without having to worry about provisioning and managing infrastructure.
Hey everybody, I'm James Sansbury. I work for Tugboat, which is a CI/CD deployment preview tool built by Lullabot, and Lullabot's a web development agency. So I got my start as a web developer about 15 years ago and have been working for web development agencies for about 12 of those years. So I've gotten the honor of working with some of the biggest brands out there, so like Intel, Cisco, IBM, NBC, MarthaStewart.com way back. And yeah, so for this presentation, what our promise is for you all is that we're going to give you 5 best practices that we've seen had a huge impact on enterprise web development projects. And it may be that just one of these will make all the difference for your teams. So what kind of difference? That would be things like hitting milestones on time and under budget, fewer bugs. So that means more stability, less chaos, no more dumpster fire end of sprint demos, if y'all are familiar with that. I know I am. And ultimately, all this affects your bottom line. So that means you can be more profitable. Or if you're like me and profits aren't as much of a incentive, even just having more time to do the things that you enjoy. So let's get started. As an architect for Lullabot, I get to work on one of the largest support forums on the web, the Cisco support forum. And at the time, it had about 1 million user accounts. So Cisco had hired us to come in and audit the application and invited me to one of their production deployment calls. So apparently their production deployments were super fragile. So as such, when I hopped on this call, there were about 20 folks on the call, ranging from Cisco directors down to junior developers, and everybody was on edge. And guess what they didn't have? They didn't have a deployment script. So instead, each deployment to prod was kind of like a snowflake. The developer would manually walk through an arbitrary set of deployment steps, and everyone on the call would basically just hold their butts, hoping that everything would go as expected. So what we risk when we don't script our build steps is a production stack like Cisco's that everyone's afraid to touch. And I've spoken with developers who were embarrassed to let their stakeholder know that they were following like a checklist even. Maybe they see that as a weakness. But checklists are underrated and super powerful. And for a build script, you can actually think of them as checklists as code, or like as the checklist of deployment tasks put to code. An important thing to ensure for these build scripts is that they get run on all of your environments. And that means they should be environment aware so that developers can use those scripts on their local environment. And as well, those same scripts are being used on production. They may be used on CI/CD, all the way up and down the chain of the deployment process. And once those scripts are being used everywhere, you'll start catching deployment bugs before they ever make it to production. And when you get that script in place across all those different environments, there are two wonderful side effects. One is that it documents the build process. You're effectively codifying and documenting the code build and deployment process along with the actual code that's being deployed. And you're setting the stage for automation. So now you have an environment aware script that can be run on any environment that does all the hard work of deploying the site. This is a quote from the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. And a checklist doesn't mean you aren't knowledgeable about how to deploy your code. And a build script, same thing. Instead, it ensures that that knowledge is applied consistently and correctly.
The next practice we'd like to talk about today is the idea of doing pre-merge validation and testing. So pre-merge validation as opposed to post-merge validation means deploying, running your tests, and showing your client the deployed product before the code is merged into a release branch. So why would you want to do this before merging? Well, one reason is that it's easier to put code in than it is to take it out. So, this is particularly true when code merges have, maybe more than one story. If you're merging an entire epic, and after you've merged a few different epics, eventually you end up with this bundle of code where if there's an issue with any one of the epics, it would be much more difficult to unwind to that change and pull it out. So it's important to do your validation and checking prior to that merge for that reason. It's also important because this approach is the best way to minimize impact to others. So once you have large teams, if you have more than 2 or 3 teams working on a single code base, you can get into the situation where team A drops a whole bunch of code into your release branch, team B drops a whole bunch of code into your release branch, and you find out that the code that team A put out there is much lower quality or it was never shown to the customer. And as a result, the customers may say, hey, this isn't ready to ship, or we've really got to change these things before the release. And now team B is totally blocked by team A's work. So being able to not only deploy, but deploy and test and show to your end users and get that sign off from them that says, yes, this is ready for the release is critical to do prior to that merge. You can think of a merge to a release branch as a commitment to release. And, we don't shy away from making commitments, but you do want to make sure that you do that testing so that you know what kind of commitment you're making and you know what issues could be a part of that prior to making that commitment. And then, of course, pre-merge testing and validation also promotes consistent high quality releases. So because you're putting the quality check earlier into the process, you're putting the customer validation earlier into the process, it ensures that you always have a release that's in a releasable state, that's high quality and ready to go. So now James is going to show us how you can use Tugboat to help deploy those environments for pre-merge validation and testing.
Thanks, Chris. I think I'm sharing my screen. So yeah, let's talk about Tugboat and how you can get a pre-merge deployment previews for all of your work. So this is a pretend site I have called the Tug Life. It's a WordPress site, a really basic WordPress site, and I have an associated GitHub repository. So GitHub is where the code for this WordPress site is maintained and managed. What you may notice here is I have this .tugboat directory. So everything else in here is just related to the WordPress site itself. But inside of this, I'm going to show you real quick how you can wire up this project to Tugboat. And that all happens in this config.yaml file. And I'm not going to get too into the details of this. It may look like there's a lot in here, but it's pretty much a copy paste from the Tugboat documentation of how to set up WordPress. The important thing to note here, just as a high level concept, is that what this is doing is it's describing to Tugboat how to build a mirror of your production website on Tugboat. So you can effectively like mirror all the server stack of your production site and tell Tugboat how to pull in that data so that you have a copy of that production website. I'm going to switch over to the actual Tugboat dashboard. So this is, if you were to go to the Tugboat dashboard, this is the page you'd be presented with. And I've already connected Tugboat to my GitHub repository, but we do have connections for other applications as well. If you're hosting on GitLab or Bitbucket or any of these GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket's enterprise offerings, we have support for that. Or if you just want to connect to a Git repository directly, you can also do that. But I'm going to go ahead and log in using GitHub. I've already done that before, so it's going to go super fast. And I've already created a couple of projects here, but real quickly, I'm going to show you what you would see the first time you sign up. So you'd see something like this. If you connected via GitHub, you'd also have access to be able to select the GitHub repository that you wanted to connect. And you can choose it from here. And then there's also some links, some helpful links here off to starter configs for different technologies. But I've already got my project set up. So let's switch over to that real quick. So this is my project here. I'm going to clean this up real quick. First thing you'll see here is we have a base preview called main. And main on this project is our primary branch. It's our stable branch for this code base. And a base preview in Tugboat is, if you can think of it as a mirror of your production site. So you typically want that to be built off of your stable branch, and it's going to be, it's going to also have production data. So if I go ahead and click preview here, Tugboat in the background will start spinning up this preview, and then take me to that preview of the production website. So this base preview is going to act as the starting point for any new previews that Tugboat will build. And that's going to mean a huge time saving. So what Tugboat's going to do is it's going to take this starting point, and anytime a new pull request is detected, it's going to take the code from that pull request, clone this base preview, and apply that code to the base preview. And it's actually going to mimic the same merge that you might do if you were to merge in that pull request and run all the same deployment steps. So you can think of it as a way to practice, or that Tugboat's actually going to run a trial run of your production deployment anytime a new pull request is pushed up to GitHub. So let's go ahead and actually show that in action. So I'm going to switch over to my terminal here. So I've got the repository checked out, and I've created a new branch already, and I've made my change to that branch. So you could think of this as like maybe one of the developers on your team, or maybe you yourself. You've got a new feature that you're wanting to push out on this website. You've created a branch. You've made the change. In this case, this is a really basic change. I'm just italicizing the H1 and H2s on the site. So this is my one-line change. And I'm going to go ahead and push this up. Whoops. So I've pushed my new branch up to GitHub. And if I come back here, so now I'm over on GitHub. GitHub helpfully tells me that there's a new branch. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new pull request. Now what's going to happen, you can already see it happening right here. Tugboat's going to jump right into action, and it's detected that there's a new pull request. And if I switch over here, you can see that it's already grabbed the base preview, and it's starting from that base preview. It's going to merge this code in just like as if you were to merge this pull request and then run all the deployment steps. So that's all happening here automatically. I didn't do anything. All I've got is that base preview set up. And just like that, it's done. And you can configure Tugboat to post a link back onto the pull request with the links to the preview. So in this case, I could click this preview and immediately be taken to the preview of the website. You can see here the titles, H1s, H2s are italic. Here's the original one. And you can also configure Tugboat to use the GitHub deployments API. So you'll see the deployment here as well. And you can see there's some other stuff going on here too. But let's switch over to the Tugboat dashboard. I want to show you a few things over there. So back over here, this is the actual landing page for just this one preview. So this is associated with that pull request that we just created. And we've got some pretty cool stuff in here. I want to point out here, this correlates to what the Tugboat config has. So we've got 2 services here. In each of those services, I can actually get a command line terminal right in here. So if I'm debugging something as a developer, or I need to try a different change, figure out why did this work on my local? Why isn't it working on Tugboat? You can do that right in here. On some of our higher tiers, we also offer automated Google Lighthouse reports. So you can get SEO reports, you can get a accessibility report. You can access that for key landing pages on this site. So for every pull request, you can get automated accessibility reports for different key pages. And in addition, on those same key pages, Tugboat will also do visual diffs. So in this case, it's using that base preview. So we've got that, this is what the production website should look like. And it takes a screenshot of that, and then it takes a screenshot of this new preview that's spun up, and it will compare the two. So here you can see, and it's going to compare them at 3 different breakpoints. So mobile breakpoint, tablet, and desktop. So you can see here, if I click into this, on the left, we've got the base preview, screenshot of the base preview, and on the right, we've got a screenshot of this preview. And here in the middle, it's going to do a pixel by pixel comparison of the two and highlight what's actually changed. And in addition, up here you can see it'll tell you what percentage of the page has changed. And coming up shortly, we're actually adding functionality to set a threshold for these builds to fail if the visual diff has changed over a certain percentage. In addition, we have all the build logs. So you see if there's anything that happened in the log that a build failed, you can look back through that. You can see the full log. And one other cool thing to point out here is Tugboat does mail capturing. So if you need to log into the website and the website sends an email, you can actually access that email right here in Tugboat and log into the site using the email form, or just debugging any sort of email that your application is sending out. So once you have this set up, this really is the way these deployment previews are the way to be able to test everything, demo everything, all before the code is actually ever merged in. And that sets you up for achieving what's called continuous delivery. What that means is anything that gets merged in has been fully tested and is ready to deploy to production. And that goes back to that commitment that Chris was talking about, that a merge is a commitment to deploy to production. So having these deployment previews lets you be able to do all the testing that you need to do, and also get stakeholder sign off on the work that you're doing to make sure you don't get to that dumpster fire demo at the end of the sprint where everything comes together and you realize this broke this or whatnot. Cool. So I'm going to stop sharing and switch it back over to the slides. This leads us to our third practice. So, web agencies, we don't often get to decide where our clients host their websites. This is especially true for sites that are in higher ed, government, healthcare, and even some enterprise clients. So, what this means for a web development agency is that you're forced to use someone else's tools to do your work. I'm kind of picturing dropping off your dream car at the mechanic and handing them that cute little IKEA toolbox to fix it with. So, as a web agency, our designers and strategists work with our clients to come up with that dream website. And then the development team rolls in to find out they can't use the tools that they know. And a lot of agencies try to get around this by asking their clients to host on a different hosting provider, actually, as a part of the sales process. And they ask them to switch to one that they're familiar with and that they like. And here's two things. One thing, I think you might be losing some sales from that. Like there are certain clients where they cannot actually switch, and that turns up as a red flag. And the other thing is, your clients need the best hosting provider for their business, which isn't always the same thing as the best hosting provider for your business. For example, you need a hosting provider that has great tooling, is rock solid, and they may need a hosting provider that's under a certain budget, or maybe it has certain security certifications, or maybe it needs to be hosted in a certain data center. So bring your own tools to the job for testing and demos, and here's why. There's a project we were on, I think it was last year, and we've had lots of projects kick off similar to this, where there's the promise of, okay, you guys can roll in and we'll have dev stage and prod servers ready for you. It's just going to be a couple of weeks. And we've had projects literally that it goes months and months. And the project I'm thinking of a couple of years ago, the project itself was 3 to 4 months, and it took them 3 months to actually get infrastructure for us to use. But thankfully, we had Tugboat. So when you bring your own testing and demo environments, you can get started right away without any blockers. Your developers can continue to hone and master their skills as well, because they aren't switching their entire process every time a new client project starts. And especially if your developers are juggling a few projects at a time, that context switching is not only stressful, but it's also very risky. And when you use the same tools over and over again, your PMs and maybe the CTO as well, you'll be able to start to isolate bottlenecks in the process and remove them. And the cool thing is, those improvements don't just benefit you, and they don't just benefit that one client. Since you're using the same tools everywhere, they benefit all your clients. You're muted, Chris.
Thank you. The next practice we're going to talk about is the practice of automating your testing, especially for defects. And, automated testing, definitely a no-brainer if you're building product for your own company, either internal tools that you're going to own or something that you've published to your customers. But a lot of people in doing agency work have said, well, if I'm just delivering a one-off project for somebody, is it still worth doing automated testing? And the answer is absolutely yes. And there are a few reasons why. One is that the automated tests are the best way that you have of instilling trust with your client. Nothing destroys that trust as much as delivering something that you said was going to work, and then another sprint ticks by and half of what you built 2 weeks ago doesn't work anymore because there weren't automated checks in place. And so having a layer of automated tests that can ensure that consistency and reliability and quality from one release to the next really helps build trust with the client and that's how you win repeat business. So, you know, how many of us start with our biggest project for a client as the first project? You know, almost none of us. It's usually the first one is a small project to kind of test the waters and build that relationship. And so, you know, providing high quality product that's backed by automated tests is a really great way of establishing that trust to get repeat business. Additionally, it means you get consistent results for your client, regardless of who's on the delivery team. We don't always get to decide when people join our delivery teams or when they leave. We may need to reassign them to other clients. They may decide to leave the company. And automated tests are a great way of ensuring that regardless of who you have assigned to a client's project, they're still going to be delivering with the same amount of quality and ensuring that there's continuity in terms of what the client asked for and what the system does, regardless of whether or not new developers are familiar with all of those previous conversations. And something else that's interesting about automated tests in the last few years is that more and more clients are actually expecting this as part of the work product. More of their investors are holding them accountable for whether or not they have high quality, repeatable processes backed by green builds and automated tests. And a lot of the auditors are even expecting it. You know, I never thought I would hear an accountant say, "Do you have automated tests?" And yet that comes up all the time now. So you know, when you start getting into your things like your ISO 27Ks, your SOC 2 compliance, you know, knowing who has access to production, who doesn't, what's automated, what isn't, is really a critical aspect of that now. And the last practice we wanted to share with you all today is the idea of doing post deployment testing. So, post deployment testing, as opposed to pre deployment testing, means performing testing and validation after the software has been deployed to various environments. Those environments could be previews in Tugboat for all your pull requests. It could be a QA environment, RC environment, prod. You could even have Tugboat previews of the code branches representing each of those. And this stands in contrast to unit testing, where a lot of the testing takes place prior to the code actually even being deployed somewhere or even being running somewhere. Unit testing tends to rely a lot on mocks and stubs and various things like that, which makes the tests fast, but doesn't necessarily test the full stack. So why do you want to do post deployment? Well, unit tests they're essential, they're great, and if you don't have them, you should. But they're not sufficient for testing everything that needs to be tested. So once you deploy, that's when you start putting in your configurations. That's when you start integrating with third-party services. That's when you start replacing your mocks and stubs with actual implementations of things. And a lot can go wrong in that process. So it's important to have your unit tests, but not rely solely on those unit tests. Additionally, post deployment tests, unlike unit tests, test the deployment itself. So a lot can go wrong in the deployment process. You know, there can be existing files in place that don't get cleaned up properly. There can be permission issues, things like that. And so as a result, running some level of testing after you've done a deployment is critical to catching those types of issues. And it's also an opportunity to run a different scope of testing depending on where you are in your software development lifecycle. So some organizations, you know, they may want to run uh, just smoke tests against every pull request, and then when the code gets integrated into their development environment, that's when they run the full regression. Other organizations want to run as much as possible up front. But in any case, there's always some certain amount of testing, whether it's, you know, performance testing, load testing, security testing, manual and exploratory testing, things like that, where you have additional testing that you want to do later on in the process where it's more affordable to do so. Good example, I worked on a big data system, and having full copies of, you know, terabyte and petabyte databases so that you can run test pre-production isn't always an option, or is incredibly expensive. And so you really need to balance, which tests are you running so that you're running the right tests at the right time. So how might you run the same set of tests in different environments and run a different scope, depending on when those tests are running? So we've got the same demo that James just went through. We've got it set up in the Testery platform, using our integration between the two platforms. And as you can see, we even already ran a test run. So this get reference refers to his pull request. And if we click through, you can see we ran a couple of tests. So we navigated to the preview environment and we searched. And so you can see, this test navigates to the preview and it searches. And in the screenshot, you can even see now this is italic, whereas before it wasn't. All of this happened automatically on the same pull request. So if I click through to GitHub, you'll see on the pull request, we can see the code change that was made. And then we can also see that of the checks that ran, one of the checks is referring to the Tugboat deployment itself. And then there are a couple of other from Tugboat, the visual diffs, the lighthouse reports. But we also have the Testery test results here. And so you can see that, we ran a couple of tests and they passed. And then you can click through and get back to the test run that we were just viewing. Now, suppose you want to run the same set of tests against a different environment. Now all you need to do is you can come in and you can say, I want to create a new test run. I want to run the latest set of tests. I either want to run it now, I want to schedule it for later. And you can choose which tags you filter on. So a lot of organizations we work with, they'll have tags for things like smoke tests versus full regression. They may have, third-party integrations. They may have performance or load tests. And so you can pick what scope of tests that you want to run. And you can even pick which environment you want. So here, our integration is automatically creating environments for each pull request, because Tugboat is spinning up those previews. And then the test runs are being run against those. And then you can do various things with the test results. So you can schedule a test run if you want those tests to run nightly. Maybe you run full regression nightly and you just run your smoke tests on every pull request. And you can also set up alerts. So maybe I want to know, whenever a test run fails, I want to trigger a webhook or send a Slack message. And I can notify my team in whatever Slack channel they hang out with of, hey, you just committed something, the preview got built, the automated tests ran against that preview, and we found that one of our business rules was violated. Boom, here's the test results. Click here to go through and see the screenshots and review the test. So it's a really awesome way to know that what you're about to deliver to your clients is very high quality. So what do you have to do to enable this functionality? Well, if you ask me even just 5 years ago, you'd have to build quite a bit. And it almost makes me cry a little because, like James got my start as a developer, around 15 years ago. And this kind of stuff used to be a whole lot of work. So folks today are a little spoiled, if you ask me. So right now to get this working, this is the same Tugboat configuration. Aside from signing up for the account, we only had to add 3 lines to the Tugboat configuration here. We install the Testery CLI. We call the update environment command, which is what creates an environment in Testery for the preview. So you're basically saying, hey, I want this new preview environment out there. I want it to have this URL. And then we kick off a test run using create test run. And we tell it we want it to run against the Tugboat preview. And really, you could add those steps. Anybody can add those 3 steps, and everything you've seen today would just be working out of the box. So it's really it's the fastest way I know of to go from just having code that does what your software is supposed to do to having a fully provisioned environment with the preview that your customers can go and interact with, that your automated tests run against, that you get alerts and notifications when things go wrong. And you've seen all of that live right now in just a few minutes. So it's really a pretty smooth way to do your development. And smooth is always good for client delivery. So um, I think that's if you wanted to change the tests, um, the same process that James just went through, we could just modify this and go ahead and create a pull request, push it out there, and that'll go ahead and trigger the process and kick off the test runs and everything. So, um, and that's all you have to do. So, uh, does anyone have any questions now about what you've seen today? Let's see. We have one question. It says from Anonymous. How many tests can you run in parallel? Can you run the test for multiple deployments using Tugboat previews at the same time? So in Testery, the only limitation of how many you can run in parallel is, uh, you know, it's constrained by two things. One is the system under test. So whatever system is being tested, how much throughput it can handle. And then the other would be just your budget. So we have very affordable runners. We have some clients that are running hundreds of parallel with no issues at all. And in terms of scale, we've run, uh, we have one customer that I believe in a single month did over 2 million test executions. So scaling is definitely not an issue. In terms of running the multiple deployments using Tugboat previews at the same time, I don't see any issue with that. As long as the preview has been provisioned, it's going to be out there. And so if you just kick off a test run and you point it at that preview, uh, it doesn't matter how many test runs you kick off, they're all going to be running. Any other questions? Let's see. We have a question of what do I have to do to sign up for accounts with Tugboat and Testery? Um, at least on the Testery side, you just go to, I think it's testery.io/sign up or something. It's linked to on our main page. So you click for new account. We have a free account you can sign up for. And then I believe James actually showed that as part of his demo as well. So one of the things that's nice about everything you've seen here is you can do what you've seen here on the free accounts. So we have the ability to sign up for those, and based on uh, how many resources you're using and how many concurrent tests you need in minutes and things like that. A lot of folks can make some pretty good progress just by signing up. So. Any other questions? Okay. So thank you all for joining us. If you do come up with additional questions later on, feel free to email me at the email address on the screen, chris.harbert@testery.io, or James is james@tugboat.qa. We'd be happy to answer any of your questions or direct you to folks who can give you more support. And then you can also use these QR codes or follow these links to check out the Testery case studies, where you'll see how we've helped some clients with various things related to test automation, or you can go to tugboat.qa and learn more about Tugboat. We'll also have published a link to these slides, and if anybody wants the recorded copies of today's presentation, let us know.
Thanks, everybody. Look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Thanks. Have a good day, everybody.